Streaming from Oklahoma's own digital studio, this is Stephen Nehrenz with This Week in Weather.
Hi everyone, Meteorologist Stephen Nehrenz here. Welcome back to This Week in Weather on this July 16th. I almost forgot the date here, July 16th, 2025. As always, really appreciate you joining me here as we stream This Week in Weather from the News on 6 digital desk. We are finally, weather-wise, finally, at long last, trending towards the typical summer heat and humidity pattern, which I know we don't always look forward to, but after all the rain we've had this spring and this summer, it's a pattern that we've been kind of waiting on for a while. We're going to discuss just how hot it's about to get coming up in just a few minutes. As I always start with here on This Week in Weather, of course, if you have things you would like me to discuss here on a weekly basis, you know where to find me, my email address, my Facebook page, and also the comments on this video and the previous videos that get posted on our News on 6 YouTube channel, whether it's interesting weather here, interesting weather across the country you want to see discussed, or maybe it's just something as simple as, hey, I took this really cool picture, this phenomenon in the sky, what is this? Any range of topics here, specifically things that I can try and go into a little more detail that I don't always have time for on air. Great things to discuss here on This Week in Weather as we get further into the summer and further down the line. And I mentioned the whole, maybe you've sent in a cool picture, you've seen something in the sky and wondering what it is, because that's what I'm going to start with here this week, just kind of a little bit of interesting phenomenons that I've had a few different pictures of the past few days that I just want to chat about briefly before we get into the forecast for the rest of the week and beyond. Cool picture here. This is taken by Tom Carver in the Adair vicinity, I believe is where this was taken just in the last day or two. You might have to look pretty closely, but kind of look just under the little banner there, kind of in the middle of the screen. Right in kind of the middle of the image, you notice how there's a little bit of, I put rainbow in the sky, question marks. I know a lot of times, folks, if you see this feature, you go, well, that's interesting. It's kind of like a rainbow, but not a rainbow necessarily. Here's another picture where it shows up, even more vibrantly. This was taken by John Baden. It was, I believe, in the Ulaga area in the last few days, where you can kind of see how those vibrant colors there. Pretty cool sight, right? And again, this is happening on a day, at least when these pictures are taken, when there weren't thunderstorms happening, not the classic rainbow necessarily. So what is this necessarily? What is this feature? If you're wondering, some of you may know because we've discussed that before. And in general, just kind of, breaking down why we see different colors. I'm not going to act like I'm the foremost expert on the eyes, right? But these are kind of some basic things, whether we're talking about what you see in the sky or not, as far as why we perceive and see different colors with light refraction. You kind of see the little graphic on the screen there. But particularly, when we're talking about, seeing different features, different colors in the sky. So light, as it passes through raindrops, way up thousands of feet above our heads. All those clouds that you see are made up of raindrops or ice crystals. When light passes through those, slowly it slows down a little bit, bends as it enters that raindrop, reflects at a critical angle, comes out of the raindrop at kind of a different angle, and those red and violet lights exit at different angles. When that starts happening, of course, when that light's going through a cloud, it's not just going through one raindrop or ice crystal, it's going through many of them. And as more and more of those kind of intersect, you can kind of see there that explainer on the screen. As you get more and more of those reflections coming out of those raindrops and then passing towards your eye, kind of your vision there, you start getting that refracted, red light and violet light. Why you see that different spectrum of colors when we often see the rainbow, and that's why you see kind of the spectrum of the rainbow the way that we see it when one does happen. Now, as I mentioned, what we were seeing there in this picture a few minutes ago, it wasn't a rainbow. You could maybe call it a type of rainbow, sort of, and I'll explain that in a second. And of course, how this works with seeing a rainbow in particular when you go see kind of a normal one. But what more than likely we were seeing in those pictures is what's called a circumhorizontal arc. Very wordy / nerdy kind of term, right? But there's a reason for it. You all may also hear it called a circumzenithal arc, even more wordy explanation. But again, you can kind of see on the screen there, and I'll go full screen so maybe you can read that text a little bit better. That color display, instead of being kind of the classic rainbow, is almost like directly overhead, as you saw in those pictures, also called the zenith of kind of where you're looking overhead. But it depends on, seeing this feature kind of has to have a certain sun angle, a higher sun angle, which we obviously will get in the summertime. It has to be at a certain angle. You kind of see that number on the screen. And then that light is refracting through those ice crystals, plate-like ice crystals, specifically in those high, thin cirrus clouds that you were seeing in those pictures. Those are higher up in the atmosphere. They're in an part of the atmosphere that's colder, and so instead of just all raindrops, there's ice crystals in those clouds. As that light is refracting through them at a certain angle, you can get those kind of arcs that are somewhat horizontal. Sometimes they're not always horizontal, but for lack of a better term, that's what's happening here. And so again, I mentioned, kind of said rainbow in the sky earlier. Well, a question mark is what I had in the first picture, but we'll go back to that picture one more time from John, and believe that would be a circumhorizontal arc in the sky. Sometimes you'll see features like this that's called cloud iridescence. They're all fairly similar to one another, but the long and short of that wordy slash nerdy explanation is that's kind of rainbow right in the kind of horizontal rainbow in the middle of the sky is kind of what it looks like. That's often what you're seeing when you see a sight like this, which we can often see in the summer when we have in particular these high thin cirrus clouds rolling through. So again, cool pictures that I had sent in over the last few days that I kind of wanted to just show and talk about briefly what you're seeing there. All right, into the weather, and as you know, on a weekly basis, we've been talking about how much rain we've had this spring and the summer, the entire year. Obviously, that's impacted our temperatures as well, but we've continued to have rain at a near record pace for the entire year. Look at the stats on your screen now. As we've gotten into the middle of July, we've had almost 40 inches of rain in Tulsa. That qualifies for our second wettest year to date on record. It's through, rainfall totals through the middle of July on a yearly basis. The only year that was wetter up to this point was 2008. These records for Tulsa for rainfall go back to like the late 1800s. We're still ahead of 2015's pace, 2019's pace, 2007's pace. Those were all, as you know, extremely wet springs and even summers around here in Green Country, and we have surpassed that pace. Another way of putting this in perspective, Tulsa's average rainfall for the entire year is, I believe it's 40.96 inches. We're essentially only an inch away from our average annual rainfall total, and we've still got 5.5 months to go in the year. Just another way of explaining how incredibly wet it has been. Now, this persistently, seemingly never-ending rainy and stormy pattern is looking like it's about to come to an end, but we do have one more storm chance to get through for the late week time frame. We'll talk about that in just a second. Of course, the impact of all this rain and storms is it has kept the summer heat at bay. Now, yes, I know we still had plenty of hot and steamy days, but nothing that's really just been terribly extreme. By summertime standards, our high temperatures, you can see for the first half of the month, most of them have been consistently a few degrees below normal. Normal high for July is creeping from the low 90s into the mid 90s, and of course, often days it gets hotter than that. We've had a few fluctuations here and there, but most, as you can see, most of the first half of the month, we've been upper 80s to around 90. We've had several days in, the mid to upper 80s, at least for our highs. Heat index obviously has been higher than that. But like I said, it has kept our temperatures at bay for the first half of the month. Obviously, we haven't been anywhere near 100 so far this summer. I'm not complaining about that. I don't think most people would complain about that either. Compared to the last few summers, up to this point, through the middle of July, last summer, 2024, we had already had 4 triple-digit days. Up to this point. 2022, we had already had 12 triple-digit days up to this point. This is the time of summer. I mean, obviously, they can happen as early as June. And the last few years, we've been having triple-digit days in June. Not this year because of all the rain. But typically, from the middle of July through about mid to late August is our hottest stretch of the year, right? And that's when we start picking up more triple digits. Eventually down the line, we may start trending that way. In fact, later this weekend and early next week, we start creeping closer to 100 than we have been this year. It may take us a while to get there because of how consistently muggy it is around here because of all the rain that we've had. But again, from a triple-digit heat standpoint, thankfully we're running behind the pace of the last few summers. Again, not the worst thing in the world, at least in my opinion. But you can see where the highs and the heat index values are headed over the next several days. The highs there in the yellow, heat index in the red on a daily basis. And of course, you see we're kind of creeping up day by day, especially by this weekend and early next week. Those heat index numbers are going to be a little bit more stifling, a little more oppressive than they have been for most of the summer up to this point. Heat index 105 or above. I mean, it's already, like I said, it's already been feeling steamy, I know, but heat index 105 or above is kind of that next category of heat stress concerns for your outdoor activities, and that's going to become more and more of a daily concern going forward this weekend and the beginning of next week. It's going to be more of kind of a daily, heat concern, heat stress concern for us, kind of on a daily rinse and repeat basis for a while. Again, mid to late July, that's not exactly surprising, but this is that more, typical, less rainy, more hot summer pattern that we've been waiting on for a while, starting to head our way. I'll give you a look at the wide view on the water vapor satellite, and this is how we look at those upper level storm systems as the things that we're kind of keeping an eye on for the rest of the week. That upper level ridge, that big old H there you see centered to our south and west, that's the upper level ridge, the heat dome. That has been, this summer it's been hanging around, but it's been weak enough or centered off to our west and our east that the upper level jet stream's still been steering in storm systems, steering in these rainmakers, and it hasn't been able to really take hold yet. But that's going to change in the next few days. Now, there's a couple upper level lows on either side of that ridge, one off the Baja California that's not really going to impact our weather, at least in the short term, and then another one going through the Gulf. And I will say that, over the next few days, that system, the folks at the National Hurricane Center are going to be keeping a close eye on that system as it drifts through the northern Gulf towards the coast of Louisiana. At this point, at least as we're recording here, the setup for this doesn't necessarily seem to lend itself to that becoming like a major tropical system like a hurricane. You always have to watch it this time of year because those Gulf waters are getting very warm, and sometimes these systems can strengthen more rapidly than anticipated at times. But at the moment, it doesn't appear that that's going to become just like a monster hurricane system or something like that. But it has a lot of moisture with it. It's going to bring a lot of rainfall from late week through the beginning of the weekend along the Gulf Coast region, specifically the Louisiana region, New Orleans area. They're in for a lot of rain for the end of the week. And there's a possibility that we may see at least a tropical storm or something of the like develop out of that as far from a wind standpoint. So that's going to be watched in the tropics. Now here's a look at the big picture as far as, but by the way, that system down in the Gulf is not going to have a huge impact on our weather. It's not going to come our way and bring us like another plethora of rain because we don't really need that at this point. That system will slide up into the Gulf by the end of the week. As we look at the big picture here, what's going to happen is for our Thursday, even as that upper level ridge, that heat dome is starting to build, there's another system zipping through the northern plains that's going to help usher a front closer to our area. The front's not really going to get here. What it's going to do will trigger thunderstorms, kind of a larger complex of storms heading into from late Wednesday night into Thursday morning across Kansas that drops south. And then an outflow boundary from those storms will fire up more storms across green country Thursday morning and Thursday afternoon from Tulsa to the north in particular. So that's going to happen again on Thursday. That's kind of our last gasp of storm chances even as the ridge develops. That'll linger into Friday morning. And then after that, as we head into the weekend, here comes the heat dome finally starting to take hold for the first time, at least for us, pretty much all summer. Over the weekend through the first half of next week. The ridge, now the center of the ridge will waffle back and forth. That's what it always does this time of year. But the strength of that heat dome is what we haven't really seen this summer as far as it not only being centered pretty close to us, but really starting to dominate the weather pattern, pushing the jet stream way to the north. If you look on the big picture here, look where kind of all those wind arrows are in the northern plains. That's how you can see where the stronger wind flow is way off to our north, the stronger upper level wind flow. And the sinking motion that's promoted by that upper level ridge, which keeps the lift for thunderstorms away from us, helps the heat just kind of crank up on a daily basis. And we'll discuss this over the next few weeks as the heat continues to build. You'll start to get kind of that what's called ring of fire setup around that ridge where you can kind of see it here on the big picture where there's storms kind of on all edges of the heat dome up the little ridge to our south, to our north. They kind of circle around it, but if you're right under the middle of that heat dome, you don't see any of that. The heat just cranks up, and that looks like where we're headed from this weekend and into next week. Like I said, appropriately as we head towards the latter half of July, looks like the heat's really going to start to take off on us. So looking ahead to the weekend, I will say this is the first time in I don't even know how long, where it looks like we've got a weekend forecast with really no appreciable storm chances of your weekend plans. I will still say I've got a 0% there on Friday morning, early Friday morning, north of Tulsa. We may have kind of a last gasp of showers and storms hanging on. I think after early morning Friday, that goes away. So the rest of Friday during the daytime hours to the afternoon, storm chances should be pretty minimal, slim to none. Same story Saturday and Sunday. Highs creeping into the upper 90s, and as I highlighted earlier, heat index creeping over 105. We'll have at least somewhat of a breeze most days, but it's going to start to get, like I said, into a daily routine here of things getting a little more stifling in the afternoon, early evening hours. Again, nothing that we haven't seen before. This is, frankly, pretty close to normal for late July, but it's certainly going to be hotter than we've been the last few weeks as the storm chances start to fade away. So be prepared for that. And another update on those lake levels, of course, as we've told you on a weekly basis, as you're well aware, they have been running really high because of all the spring and early summer rains. Some of them have gotten back into a much more reasonable range. So if you got lake plans for this upcoming weekend, lakes like Skytook Lake, Lake Eufaula, Lake Tenkill, or even Grand Lake have all gotten back into much more reasonable elevations. Some of them have been there already, but a few like Grand Lake that were previously pretty high have settled back into a little more reasonable range, still a couple feet above normal, but better, boating-wise than they were earlier this summer. Some still have a ways to go. Copan Lake is still very high. Lake Hudson actually has been climbing for the first half of this week because of more rain. That should start to settle down soon. And Lake Keystone, Kaw Lake in particular, but also Lake Keystone is still stubbornly very high with, they have to manage those releases out of Keystone down the Arkansas River. And so it will drop some and then hold steady and then drop some as they kind of manage those releases from the lake. So Keystone is still running quite high if you're making lake plans this weekend, as we've emphasized all summer. Of course, you always want to check ahead on if you're trying to find a campground that may still be closed because of the high water levels on some of these lakes, you always want to check ahead on that. But we're finally getting to a point where at least some of the area lakes are in much better shape elevation-wise than they had been through this summer. So better news on that. And like I said, it will be a hot and steamy weekend. It'll be a good lake and pool weekend ahead of us. As I always remind you, This Week in Weather is posted every week, streaming on our News on 6 YouTube channel. And again, you can, find it posted there and rewatch it whenever you want. Go back and kind of pick out the specific segments you want to watch. If you're listening to part of this and going, okay, get ahead of the forecast, you can jump ahead a few minutes into the forecast as you're kind of rewatching this. And we will continue to post these on a weekly basis as we get further into the summertime now, and we're starting to get more into the, like I said, the typical heat pattern after the seemingly endless storm chances that we've been on for, almost 3 months, 3.5 months at this point. The summertime heat pattern is looking like it's finally starting to take hold on a more consistent basis. As always, thank you for tuning in here for This Week in Weather. We'll see you next time. Be good to each other, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you for watching this Oklahoma's own digital studio live stream from the Bob Mills Weather Center. Stay with News on 6 online and on television anytime for the latest weather updates to keep you safe and informed.